Okay, now that we put together a moving texture map, now we're going to talk about actual movement. Movement of the objects, movement of the cameras, movement of the lights, and we're going to start with the camera. Okay, here we are on layout again, and as you can see, everything is as it was before. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take this, and believe it or not, we're going to start with the end of the animation rather than the beginning. And that means that we're going to look at where we want this to finally end up. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to go to the 500th frame, and we're going to tap there. And so that is the 500th frame. That's the last frame of our animation. And I'm going to add 100 more. So that'll give us 600 frames in total. And at the 500th frame, I'm going to establish a keyframe. Now what a keyframe is a point at which this is what it's supposed to look like. Meaning that whatever happens at the 500th frame, I want it to look like this. And so what happens in the other frames is a whole other ball game. So a keyframe is a fixed point in the universe that doesn't change. So I'm going to hit Create Keyframe, and I'm just going to hit OK, and there it is. And you see it's a little bitty white speck there. Now another thing, you can have keyframes for different things. Right now this is set up for objects. I'm also going to set it up for the camera because that's actually more important to me now. So if I click on the camera, I'm going to create keyframe again, and there it is. So the camera position at 500 is currently set. And we want to change that because we want the 500 frame to look exactly the way we want it to look. So one of the first things we want to do with that is to provide a background that we can sort of mold this to. And so if I go into the Render tab, and I go into this really aptly named feature but kind of little used called Set Big Image, I'm going to put an image in the background. And I'm going to choose for that image this logo. And when I hit OK, you'll see that the logo is taking up the background. And so what we want to do is we want to match the camera view to that. We want to make this image look like that background. So the background is two-dimensional, and it's never going to be seen by the user. So basically what we do first is we go to our camera and we modify it, we rotate it so that we can get the text looking normal. We're going to get the horizon nice and level, and we're going to get the text looking relatively normal. It's probably too much. And we can check this more thoroughly in perspective view. We go to Remove, and we can bring it out like that. And let's look at perspective view for a minute and see how that's going. So if we look at the... and that's not all that bad. So we go back into camera view, and we can move the camera forward a little bit. And as you can see, that is pretty close. It's pretty close to what it's supposed to be. Except, of course, the focal length is completely ridiculous. The focal length is still wide angle, so the tower's being stretched like crazy. So we're going to go into camera properties, and we can see that our focal length is 14.8. We're going to call that roughly 15 millimeters. Now that's a very wide angle lens. And believe it or not, we want to zoom in. We want to make this a much longer lens. So if I drag this forward, you can see that we're zooming in, and I'm going to zoom in all the way to the point where we're actually inside the image, which doesn't make optical sense, but it'll work. So we're going to take it all the way into, let's say, 150, let's say, something rather high like that, which would be more of a telephoto lens. And then we move the camera back, just using the Move tool, and you can see that the image looks a great deal less distorted, and that is because the lens now looks a lot more normal. And we can move up, and so that way the image is roughly correct, and it doesn't actually have to be perfect. We just want to get it close. So it lines up just about. And we may even take that focal length back a little bit more. So let's say we zoom in to say 250 and move it back. And line it up. And we may even rotate it a little bit. And that's pretty good. And for our purposes, that's actually going to be good enough. Now we can also, remember we made the tower larger at one point? And remember, this is frame 500. So I'm going to grab the tower, and I'm just going to size that down a little bit. And I'm going to move the tower over here. So whatever the tower does, when it gets to 500, it's going to be where it's supposed to be. Size that down just a little bit more. And while we're here, since we're doing camera movement, I'm going to have some fun here. I'm going to go to rotate. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just spin this once, so that by the time we get all the way through the animation, you may not see it very much, but the tower will have turned around. And while I'm there, I can line it up so it looks a little bit more, that's cheating a little bit, but we can do that. And so there we have our established logo. And so now what we want to do is we want to go all the way back to the 0 frame. And we'll notice that everything changes because the focal length is all wrong now. So what we want to do is we want to get that focal length back to where it was, just so that we can use this. And so therefore, if we go to our camera properties, right now the focal length is way up there, but we want to keyframe it. Now you can't keyframe it quite as easily as you could in the other applications, so we have to hit the E button there. So at the 500th frame, we're going to create a key. So it's going to remember where that is. And then we want to create another key at 0. And at that one, we're going to bring our value down a great deal. So if we're looking here, we're going to bring our value down. And we want to see if we can scoot that to right around where that would have been, around 15. So as you can see, as you move back up towards 500, the zoom factor changes. So it's just another way of keying frames. So now if you see, if we're back at frame 1, we can see the image. And so at this point we can go back to playing. Now another thing we can do is notice how when the tower rotated, it kind of went in on itself. Well, at frame 1, we can select the tower and we can move it over a little bit. So that way it'll still do its thing, it'll just take that movement into account. So then, if we go back to our camera, we can go back where we were. And the way I want to start this animation is I want to start by being really close to this tower and looking down at it. So I'm going to rotate my camera down so I'm looking at the tower from above, and I'm going to move in like that. Maybe a little crazy, but we'll do it anyway. And while we're here, we can get rid of that background image. So basically, I'm just going to go into Image Editor, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. and that makes it go away. So let's say that I want to make the tower look big, but I don't want to lose it. I want to start there. And then let's say that by this point, now notice there's already movement as I move forward. That's because we've made some movement. So at this point, I want to move my camera in a little bit more and rotate it. And I want to go around that tower. So as I move further, I'm going to move the camera in, and then I'm going to look back, and I have to make sure that I'm not inside the tower. So let's say I rotate it like so. So I'm actually behind the letters, maybe a little closer, and then let's say I go to this point, I'm on that side of the tower, and then let's say I want to get really close to those letters. So I move in, and let's say a little bit further along here. I want to drive right to the end of them, like so. You can see how this looks. And then let's say I want to rotate back so that I'm on the other side now. Let's say that on my way back out there, I gradually frame the shot. And you can move these keyframes if you want to. And so ultimately that will be a camera movement that will finish up there with that animation. And then to see what it looks like, we're just going to go to render globals, and we're going to basically take this to frame 600, and our output will use the same, and we're just going to make this a new animation file. So we'll call this animation 2 and hit save, and then we'll just hit F10 and see what it makes for us. Okay, so you can see that it's doing its thing, it's moving around, and this may not be perfect, but in context you can see where it can do all kinds of things. And in the next segment we'll talk about adding lights to the scene.